All right, we got some tuning. Not great tuning though. They essentially just destroyed Frostfire Fire and Spellslinger Frost for raid at least, and like tickled Arcane, which is not great considering even though we haven't seen Dimensius, it was likely that we probably were going to play Arcane this tier, just due to how everything works, right? With the second to last boss and last boss usually being the most important. They both have damage amps. Nexus King, Saladar, or whatever, has Saladar, I don't know, has the ad set, which Arcane is literally perfect for, like on Dathia. Arcane, actually, if you didn't know, is currently better two target cleave than Frost in point one. So, you might be saying, oh, but there's a two target cleave. First of all, the damage amp is only one target. But anyway, um, yeah. So, not looking good for Frost or for Fire being the meta spec for all of Prague next year. In addition to the second last boss, cheat death doesn't work, so prismatic barrier is insane. Um, but they just went ahead and said, you know what? Raid testing, these things I guess showed a little bit too strong. Um, so they went ahead and just shot Frostfire. They actually lost a little bit more in this than a four-piece buff. So here you go. Frostfire SQB lost 700,000 ish DPS. Is now 6%, worse than Sunfree Fire, which I assume most of you watch Preheat and watched like his video on his feelings on raid testing, where he put Sunfury in like the uber trash tier every boss. Well, now Frostfire is in the even lower tier. So yeah, Frostfire got taken out back and shot. Bit unfortunate. It was rather fun to play. Looked pretty cool next year. But yeah, it was kind of destroying Cleave, absolutely. And then in the change they did for that was they just reduced the ignite effectiveness of the two set and then reduced the damage bonus to 20% instead of 30%, and then reduced Glacial Spike damage by 20%. For Arcane, all they did was reduce the Arcane blast damage bonus to 12 instead of 20, which is like a 0.4% damage nerf or something. 1% in the single target, zero point 0.4 in AoE, so it's essentially nothing. This was like a 5% damage nerf to Frost. Drop in this because includes Glacial Spike damage. So we got a 10% nerf to Glacial Spike and Ice Lance. And they also reduced the Splinter proc rate of its 2 set by 5%. And then they also nerfed the spell damage bonus by 20% for some reason. And this already existed, and so did this. So yeah, for Frost, this was like about a 6% damage nerf to Spellslinger. And so now it's 3% worse than Frostfire and single target, which has been unfortunate. I think it was people were looking forward to not having to play Frostfire perhaps next year. I think Spellslinger just looks more fun for it, and Spellslinger has a lot more loss in game than Frostfire does because of how its splinters and its orbs work. So yeah, Spellslinger kind of pretty bad. And then here's Arcane, right? And I know most of you probably don't really know PTR numbers, and technically sims aren't supposed to be stacked like this. But when you're having like Spellslinger or just Fire in general sim significantly below Arcane, you're not going to play those specs because Arcane is already the spec where when it's below in damage, you then have reasons to play it. Um, Obviously, like Frostfire Frost is like about on par with Arcane, but in raid this doesn't matter. And one of the main reasons is you look at this is Arcane's single target spec at 5 targets. It's just doing 15 mil full single target. Like you just took this sim and tossed it in AoE, and it's doing 15 mil 5 target. And this is Frost with all of its AoE taunts, and it's literally barely beating Spellslinger single target build on 5 targets when Frost isn't full AoE talents for Spellslinger, or in the case of Frostfire, it's down 1.5 mil, which is insane, right? It's literally 11% worse than Spellslinger single target, and it's taking massive losses to go for full AoE. So and then obviously Spellslinger decides to go full AoE damage. It's literally doing 50% more damage than Frostfire on 5 targets, but yeah, so I'm not really a fan of this. Kind of what I'd like to see is I'd like Arcane taking it back a little bit. Spellslinger is just way, way too strong right now. It's just insane if it can cleave and everything, and there's just already, too many fights that looks like Arcane would probably be a play for anyway. And I'd like the other specs to be semi-competitive. They definitely need to figure out a way for the fire tier set to still be strong in single target. It's kind of crazy that the issue was cleave and they just like absolutely destroyed their single target damage as well. If anything, they should have just buffed this glacial spike damage instead when they nerfed this and tried to maintain some of the single target. Obviously, that translates a little bit over to AoE, but a lot of their AoE value was in their two piece and not them like ignite spreading glacial spike damage. So yeah, they need to buff Frostfire back up because this was a cool set. Spellslinger, I mean, I'd like to see that be stronger because it's our two target spec. Frostfire, obviously, as you kind of saw, is rather weak in AoE, and it also sucks in two target, which I know sounds counterintuitive because the four piece is, Splay Ice Pyroblast. Here's the thing though, if you don't shatter it, it's just trash. And the main way we shatter things in AoE usually is we like Frostbolt Flurry, Glacial Spike, Flurry the off target. And you don't want to do that because when you play Frostfire, like next tier, we're actually actively avoiding casting Glacial Spike into Flurry because it doesn't shatter the Pyroblast. So yeah, the four piece for Frostfire is actually pretty bad in two target relative to Spellslinger with all its extra Fierce Frost. So tough. Anyway, not super happy with this tuning set. I think before this, I was relatively happy with where the Mage specs were standing. I mean, Arcane would still need a little bit of a tap down, and I think Frost needed a bit of a buff in AoE. Still does, obviously. But yeah, now I'm more set on that, and I hope they just buff Spellslinger because I would prefer to play it over Frostfire in Raid next year. So anyway, I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts about kind of what you want the meta to look like next year. Right now it's kind of shaping up to be Arcane and Raid and Mythic Plus. And honestly, Undermine didn't really feel like a non-Arcane tier. It felt like you did Prog, and then you just immediately went back to playing Arcane. So I just played a lot of Arcane recently. I prefer a tier with Frostfire Fire or some Frost spec. It's especially disappointing because I think Sun Fury Fire is just not very fun. It's a little bland. You just press Fire Blast, Pyroblast all over and over and over again. I don't like that. And Frostfire Fire was actually a bit more interesting and would have been playing SKB, which is fun. So yeah. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts. But yeah, curious to know what you guys are thinking about the tuning and everything. We do still have 3 weeks until the patch comes out, so a little bit longer. They're definitely gonna do more tuning, I'm sure. Just not exactly the direction I wanted their tuning to go in, really, when I don't think Frost was exceptionally overperforming. Fire certainly was in Cleave, but not really in single target or anything, so yeah. Goodbye.